Well, it looks like we're a couple minutes past the hour now. So Mary Ellen and Chelsey, I will hand it over to you and go on to the agenda slide.
Okay, thanks, Nick. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Power Hour. We're happy that you could join us. My name is Mary Ellen Riordan. I'm here with Chelsey Smith, Ann Dennis, and Alan Russell, and we will be presenting today's webinar. During the session, please type any questions in the chat. Chelsey will be monitoring that. And there will also be a Q&A at the end, but we'll try to answer your questions during each presentation if time permits. So the agenda is there. And I think to start it off, we have a poll question. So we'd like to know how long you've been working on the registry. Less than a year, 1 to 3, 3 to 5, or greater than 5. So if you could just indicate that time.
It looks like we have most people responding, so I'm going to close polling.
Okay, great. Okay, great. So we have a great mix on the call. That's great. So our next question, we'd just like you to put that in the chat. Do you participate in a CARRA registry disease work group? And if so, which one? So just put your answer in the chat. I love it, Ingrid. Okay. Okay, thanks everyone. Could we go to the next slide? Okay, so we wanted to just do a little review. So here's a picture of the journey of the registry for the last 6 years. And I know we have some newer coordinators attending. But I just wanted to show you that much has been accomplished in a very short time. The registry opened in 2015, and it has now enrolled over 11,000 participants. But that number doesn't exactly tell the whole story, because underneath the timeline, there are many projects that have been completed since that time in the registry. Using the registry, rooted in the registry, sorry. So Stop JIA was one. It was it enrolled 400 new onset poly patients. Frost enrolled 73 new onset systemic patients. We had Pepper, which was a pediatric outcomes for patients with chronic disease, that enrolled 451 participants. So that's truly amazing. And for those of you that have been here more than 5 years, I'm sure that many of you participated in those closed cohorts. And you see with Promote, Score, Limit, Recapture, uveitis, and systemic JIA lung disease, these are ongoing, or we're about to launch them. So we want to thank you for all your hard work on these cohorts, and we look forward to closing a few more. Next slide, please. So here's the update on the reconsent of the CARRA amendment. 63 sites have IRB approval, and this just demonstrates the approvals by month. On the next slide, we see that as of April 28th, 2,309 patients have been reconsented at CARRA sites, and 525 have been reconsented by the DCRI call center. So great job, everybody. And Overall, 47 sites have reconsented at least one participant. So this is just a reminder that the reconsent bonus payment is still in effect for approximately 8 weeks. So to qualify, make sure you have you complete the reconsent upload and the corresponding forms in RAVE. Thank you. And most of all, we want you to stay connected. The DCRI site calls are the second Wednesday of every month at 12:30 Eastern Time. If you do not have these invites on your calendar, please reach out to the DCRI mailbox, which is listed there. Alan, Rebecca, Sherwin, or Nina will answer your inquiry. The RCN calls are every other month, and we do that based on a doodle with the most available. And Chelsey and our emails are there and available. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, hello, everyone. Good afternoon, and thank you for calling into the Power Hour today. I am Alan Russell. I lead those DCRI CARRA Registry site calls, as Marilyn was just talking about. If we haven't had a chance to meet you yet, I would absolutely love to do that. Today, I'm just going to be talking about a few of the different reports that we send from the DCRI in order to make sure that all of our data is entered and reconciled as well as possible. So the first one is the Big Data Quality Report. It's a detailed report that shows each form as an individual log line in an Excel spreadsheet, each individual form in the CARRA Registry RAVE database. It's typically sent every 2 weeks, but we have increased the frequency recently because we are 4 weeks out from a data harvest. So we've got 4 weeks to make sure that everything is entered and complete as well as possible. So we're going to be sending those out weekly for the next 4 weeks, and then we'll fall back to our typical 2-week schedule. And I did want to mention here that we do have one of the biggest things about this report, and as far as its functionality, is that whenever we send them out to you, the filtering box will be on so that you can filter the reports by whether it be by a participant to get everything caught up, participant by participant, or by a specific form, we can do that. If the filters ever fall off of this report, you can turn them back on by going to the data box and then clicking on the filter tab, and that will turn them back on. If you're not as well versed in Microsoft Excel, feel free to reach out to us and we can walk you through how to filter and how to best utilize this report. Ultimately, that's what we're here for, is to help you guys as well as we can. Next slide, Nick. So the next few slides, I'm going to be walking through some of our FAQs from the data quality report. One of the most asked questions that we get is, what does a yes in the overdue column mean? So ultimately, what it would boil down to is that anything that has a yes in the overdue column means that data is expected to be entered. These forms coincide with the reddish brown clock icons in RAVE. So if you go into RAVE, there are different form status icons, and the reddish brown one, clock, that's a clock, means that that data entry is expected. Next slide. Another commonly asked question is, what does a form status of dirty mean? And that one boils down to that the data entry has been started, but it's not complete. There are a couple of different meanings for that. There are open query form statuses of dirties, and there are non-open query form status of dirties, as shown on this mock data quality report here. So if you were to open this data quality report and look at this event for infections treated with the IV anti-infectives, you would look and see that your form status is dirty for those 2 lines that are specified on this screen. If you look over into the far right-hand column, there is an open query column, and one of the cells has an open in it and one does not. So really all of that means is that someone here at the DCRI has manually gone in and opened a query for some of the data that was entered or has not been entered for the first line. And then the second line, where there is not an open in the open query column, means that there's just pending data entry, but that it has been started. So one of the things, and it falls perfectly into my job because I love numbers, I love metrics, I love statistics. So this is one of the big things that has always stood out to me about the data quality reports. If you have a newly enrolled CARRA registry participant, there can be up to 13 lines of just the initial forms for the baseline data entry that need to be completed before that baseline visit is done. So this is a mock participant to where if they were consented, added to the database, enrolled into the CARRA registry, but no data entry touched after that, all of these forms are individual forms that would pop up as needing data entry for just this singular baseline visit to show as complete. So big takeaway from this slide is just to try and keep up with your data entry, especially for new enrollments. These can drastically drive up your numbers if you have pending data entry for baseline visits, or drive down your numbers if you get them taken care of. Next slide. Another frequently asked question that we get is about events. Unfortunately, so I mentioned the report is just an Excel spreadsheet full of forms, but all of the event forms in the data quality reports do not require a site attention. So just like there is a checkbox for a PI, for your site PI to sign off on events, there are also checkboxes for the DCRI and CARRA safety teams to sign off on events, just like your PI has to as well. So unfortunately, those have to be completed by the DCRI and CARRA safety teams before the event shows it's fully complete. But now that I've shown you what the overdue column would look like and what the open query column would look like, if you don't have anything in either of those columns, then you're probably good to go on all the event forms. Or we can always just fall back onto logging into Rave, go into the actual form and seeing if there is any data that needs to be entered or reconciled. And I think Anne is going to speak a little bit later on about the event verification for the safety teams as well. So I'm not going to steal too much more of her thunder here. So this is a recent addition to the data quality report, come after requests of the DCRI sending too many data quality emails. So we're just consolidating them all into one, all the big data quality reports into one. So starting very recently, we have added the reconsented participants tab, and then the last two that are shown on the screenshot are coming soon. But coming soon, where it could be up to 4 or 5 different tabs in your report. Just want to call attention to that, just to make sure that everyone pays attention to additional tabs rather than just the sheet that automatically opens whenever you open the file. So the first tab is always going to be the main data quality report. It's often named sheet 1, just because that's how Excel does it whenever it first opens. The second tab is going to be for a list of your reconsented participants at your site. So Mary Ellen was talking about the reconsent process earlier on. The participants that will pull in this tab will be participants that have been reconsented, the forms uploaded, and all of the data entry complete in the forms. The third tab is an incomplete reconsent entry. We haven't sent our first round of those yet, but we're planning to next week. It's basically going to be participants who have started their reconsent data entry, but have not completed it. So for example, if a participant has been reconsented and everything done in the contacts database, but the reconsent date was not entered into the CARRA registry database, that would pull into a report that we can send to you all at the sites, just to hopefully optimize your payments from CARRA going forward for all the hard work you're doing for reconsenting your participant. And then the last tab is for cohort potentially eligible participants. So these will have variations. We're going to be sending them out for a lot of the different cohort studies. So if they won't just say cohort, they'll say whether they're potentially clue participants, potentially recapture participants, promote, and so on. And these are just going to be reports of participants that, based on current data entry, they could potentially be eligible for that cohort. And so just as a heads up to keep your eye out for those participants if they're coming back into clinics anytime soon and are eligible for enrollment. Next slide. Okay, all of that was about the big data quality report that we send. All of these are additional DCRI provided data checks. They are listed and described on the screen here. Just for sake of time, I'm not going to read the slide to you. These are usually sent in the off weeks of the big data quality report, whenever we are sending that every 2 weeks. So if the big data quality report is sent on the 1st and 3rd week, then all of these additional DCRI provided data checks are sent on the 2nd and 4th week. And the next slide actually dives into the last report, the consecutive missed visits report. So I actually sent one of these out today. So if you have any participants who have consecutive missed visits, you should have an example of this to go off of very recently. So these are also sent every 2 weeks in the big DQR off weeks. It identifies participants who have 2 or more missed visits that are entered consecutively. And the reason that we do this is that per the protocol, any participant who has not been contacted successfully for 9 months or more should be moved to the call center so that they have a chance to contact those participants. Next slide. So in addition to all of the data quality reports, we also send out site assessment reports quarterly. These are reports that show how your site is doing as a comparison to the CARRA registry as a whole. It zooms in on different portions of the registry. The most recent one was sent on Friday, April 23rd, and it was sent to all active site PIs, sub-Is, and study coordinators at the time. So if you have joined the team in the past week and a half or so and don't have this report, feel free to reach out to the DCRI CARRA registry team here, and we can get you a version of that. But these reports, they include quantitative measures to help visualize and see where different site-specific successes and shortfalls come. Next slide. So as I mentioned, the primary purpose is to just provide an overview of your site's performance across the 4 key areas of registry participation. And those are enrollment, data entry, that's both RAVE and Qualtrics data entry and reconciliation. And a lot of the data entry portion has been recently digging into critical variable completeness, and is also going to talk about that a little bit deeper in a little bit. It also looks at biosample collection and event reporting. So while it just shows you different metrics that you can bring to your team huddles, and just kind of talk about what you do well, what you might not do as well as a site, and help identify areas where improvements can be made and also successes be celebrated. So you may be a site that is absolutely killing it in the enrollment game. You also have to do the data entry for all of those enrollments. So it's just finding a happy balance in where your site fits into the big picture of the CARRA registry and how all of that site work goes. I think that was my last slide. Yep.
Great. Okay. So to piggyback off of what Alan has been talking about with reports, we're going to dig in a little bit to critical variables and event reporting. And I think just because we're doing fairly well on time, especially when we get into the event reporting, if there are questions, I'm happy to pause and answer questions as we go along. If that's easier for this section, you can either chat them or just interrupt me, that's fine. But feel free to ask as we go along. Next slide. So critical variables, we've talked about this a bit over a lot of our last, some of the last registry calls we've had. We did an investigator call last fall where we dug into this in a bit of detail with our PIs and sub-Is. But the point of our critical variables are to make sure that the registry collects data that can be used for all kinds of purposes, everything from the phase 4 work that the registry participates in to other external studies that may layer onto the registry. And then obviously for publications, I think everyone's aware there's quite a push to get some publications out with registry data, and there are quite a few being done. And we really want to make sure that the data we have are clean and complete and provide answers to some of the questions that our investigators are asking. The variables that have been defined that we'll look at in a second, they were not just picked randomly. They were picked because they're important for each specific disease group, really, to be able to answer most of the critical questions that someone may ask. And they're also not meant to be, data that are hard to get. So it should be ideally information that is readily available from clinic notes, labs, and, regardless of whether you're seeing a patient face-to-face in the clinic or via telehealth, the idea is that you'll still be able to capture most of these critical variables. Next slide. So here are our variables for each disease group. We don't need to go through them specifically one by one, but the idea across the board, doesn't matter what disease the patient has, if they are enrolled in the registry, the physician global and the patient parent global are considered critical for everyone. So I do want to really highlight those today. And then looking at the disease specific variables that are listed, again, the idea is that all of these are captured at any visit that a patient may have. And if it's not captured, it's not something that you can readily access from your patient's chart, it needs to be something that is put in front of a provider's face to grab as soon as possible after the visit, which is why we provide a couple of different versions of our worksheets. I know we've had a few sites that have created some physician specific worksheets that pull out the data points that we really need to capture either during or just after a visit to make sure that they can be entered into RAVE. The physician global is one of them. Active joint count for GIA is one of them, but really take a look at this list and, sit down and make sure that within your clinic, within your workflow, you have a way to grab these data points from each visit. And if this is a good example of if you need some guidance on this, the RCN is a really great resource because they are on the ground and doing this themselves. So if you want to get some examples of how they capture these across whatever visit type, definitely reach out to Riordan and Chelsey and they can help facilitate that conversation. And if you have questions about really what some of the CRF questions themselves are actually asking, if it's not clear enough, if the instructions, really don't help frame what information we're trying to get with some of these questions, you can reach out to our team at DCRI and we're happy to help talk through that. You'll notice in RAVE that as of last March, we have put queries in RAVE that if you go through the CRFs and you enter unknown, not done, or just try to save a blank field for any of these critical variables, you'll get a query that reminds you that it's critical and asks you basically to confirm that it's actually not available before you save the form. It's important for everything, but we want to make sure that, especially for these, we're really trying extra hard to make sure that we can capture usable data for each of these fields. Next slide. So while they all are important, I do want to highlight lupus because a good section of the critical variables for lupus are lab-based. And we've noticed that that's where a lot of our missingness comes from for the lupus critical variables. And this is a good example of where workflow may come into play. So if you have patients who come in, if they're getting labs done elsewhere, if they had labs done before the visit, if perhaps they're being sent for labs after the visit, remember that you have a 30-day window on either side of your patient's clinic visit date to get labs. And that window is for the labs to actually occur. So if a patient comes in today, they can have labs done 29 days from now, and that will still count for this visit. So I know that makes data entry a bit more painful because you have to remember to check. And so we want to make sure that we're not entering all the visit data, just marking everything is not done while that window for labs is still open, because it's possible that labs could come in later that can be entered and counted for that visit. In addition to just providing the critical data that we need for lupus, we're also instituting some additional site payments for lupus critical variable completion. So your site will be eligible for some extra money if all of the critical variables are completed at a given visit. I'm going to pause there and see if there's any questions specifically about labs and capturing that for not just lupus, but for anyone in the registry. No. Okay. Feel free to chat them later if something comes to you. And then there's the point down here. Oh, sorry, can you get back just for a second? the point with lupus too is that as most anyone who's entered data for a lupus visit has seen, there are a lot of derived measures that RAVE will give you based on what data you enter on other forms. So the SLEDI is a great example. The SLEDI populates based on data you enter on the lab and urine form, as well as the SLE form. So we cannot get a calculable SLEDI without the lab data. So it's just, it gets back to having data that we can use for reporting and publications. SLEDIs are critical for lupus. We want to make sure that we can be able to calculate those scores for as many visits as we can. Okay, next slide.
It actually looks like we had a question in the chat, Anne. So it looks like if labs are in multiple days, but you can only put one data in, what should you do in that scenario?
So you mean you've got, of the labs on the form, different ones are done on different days? I guess that's the question, instead of all the labs done on one day. To be totally honest with you, the date of the lab itself isn't critical. Not to use the same word too many times today, but as long as you put a date that is reflective of at least one of the panels of labs that you get, that's fine. We just want to make sure that all of the labs were done within the window. So just if there's one date that reflects the majority of the labs, you can put that one. But that's at the end of the day, we just want to have the labs in there as well. And good point, Mayor, to get physician input on that. Other questions? Okay. We can always come back to this if other questions come up. But moving on to event collection. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on the big, conceptual reasons why we capture events. I think everyone who works in clinical research is aware of why safety event reporting is important. Specifically for this registry, it is one of the primary objectives to collect ongoing safety events for patients, to be able to report on safety of different medications, different treatments, et cetera. It's important for a lot of the studies that we do within the registry. This is where a lot of the phase 4 work that the registry participates in with certain companies. This is critical that we have complete adverse event reporting. And I encourage folks, I hope everyone has at some point in time read the CARRA registry protocol. If you would like a refresher, I would suggest that pay attention to section 8 of the protocol. It gets into the weeds of event reporting, what we're doing and why we're doing it. And I think, especially if you're trying to frame it for families, or if you have turnover at your site and you're trying to retrain new coordinators or even new investigators, this is an important piece to focus on, and that will give you some more context around event reporting. This is an observational registry. We are not collecting every adverse event that ever happens to a patient. We are only collecting events that meet the criteria for SAEs, and then a protocol defined event of special interest. The list of ESIs is going to evolve over the life of the registry, and we've done at least one update to that list. We may do another one this year. The full list of events of special interest is available on the ESI CRF itself. It's available in the instructions, and it's available on the quick reference card, which we're going to look at in a minute. And I cannot stress enough to use this quick reference card, because I do think it will answer probably 95% of questions that we get about event reporting. Next slide. Not going to beat this to death. I think everyone is familiar with the SAE criteria. So if you have an event that occurs in a patient that is not on that list of ESIs, it has to meet at least one of these criteria to be reportable. And we highlight this last one, and we try to talk about this routinely. But if you have an SAE, and this is the only SAE criteria that it seems to meet, we are going to ask you for some additional justification about this. And this is where it's really important to involve your site PI, your site sub-Is. If we're asking for additional justification and we're struggling to get that, we really do want to have the medical opinion about why this SAE is, or why this event is considered an SAE for the registry. There are some cases where if this is the only criteria, and after some discussion with an investigator, the registry investigators don't feel like it really does meet the spirit of the SAE criteria, we will ask you to inactivate it. We try to avoid that. I understand it's painful to see all of your data entry work be inactivated, but we don't want to have, you know, noise, the extra events in the registry that really don't meet the criteria. The other thing about the important medical event or medically significant event criteria, if an event is an ESI, it inherently means it's important. The registry has designated that as important. We want it reported whether it's an SAE or not. There are very few cases where it's appropriate to have an ESI that's also an SAE only for this criteria. So we'll have some conversations about this back and forth with sites. It's never that we're questioning what you're trying to enter. We just really want to make sure that it's entered in the most appropriate way possible. Next slide. Okay, so this ESI definition quick reference card. An updated version of this was made available, I believe, in December, and it is on the wiki, and we'll look in a second exactly where it is on the wiki. But the goal of the ESI quick reference card is to give you the minimum reporting requirements for all of our events of special interest. Some of them we want reported regardless of how severe they were, and some of them we only want reported if they meet a certain CTCAE grade.
Caveat. I have a question. Do you plan on building medications as generic names and then allowing us to specify the brand name so we can do biosimilar studies, especially when brand names may vary from country to country?
So for medication and biosimilars, what we're doing with capturing this, as biosimilars are approved, we are adding the biosimilar option. So right now we've got, I think, 5 available in the registry. So etanercept, I believe, is one of them. So we have etanercept, name brand Enbrel, and then etanercept biosimilar, so that we're not capturing each individual biosimilar. We're just capturing the fact that it is a biosimilar. This has been a topic of discussion quite a bit over the last few years, but for right now, that's the cleanest way that we can really maintain our medication log and not have, you know, potentially 5 or 6 different biosimilars where we're really not capturing enough to do anything with. But for right now, it's just the basic biosimilar category. Anything else while we're paused? Okay, then back to ESIs. When you look at this ESI quick reference card, there's 2 kind of snippets of the card shown here. What's on the bottom here under the ESI definitions, this is a general statement that applies to all of our events. So please make sure you pay attention to what severity grade CTCAE grading scale is required for each event. If there is not a specific scale listed, you're going to use this general one that's listed here with the grade 1 through 5. If there is a specific scale, like for leukopenia shown on the right, it will show you what the scale is and what the requirements are to meet each grade. And again, make sure that you're looking to see if your event meets the reportable criteria. Leukopenia is a great example. We're not capturing grade 1 leukopenia, just grade 2 and above. So just make sure based on your lab values that it's meeting the reporting criteria. Next slide. So I know we've got a lot of documents on the wiki. We're trying to keep these as organized as possible, but there is a lot. So to find any of our quick reference cards, they're all available under reference materials on the registry's wiki page. And then the ESI definitions document is available kind of in the middle of that list. We are going to be doing, I believe, Alan, you can correct me, either the June or July DCRI site call is going to be focused on event reporting. Ahead of that call, we'll recirculate this ESI definition card just so it's in folks' inboxes, but it is available on the wiki. If you can't find it or if you struggle to find it on the wiki, just send us an email and we'll happily send it to you as an attachment. Next slide. So not to harp on this, but just again with the CTCAE scales, this is important. There've been, especially, we'll talk about COVID in a second, but as you're entering data for your events, whatever it is, pay attention to what the differences are between each of these grades. And if you have a question, obviously, please feel free to ask us. We're happy to talk through it with you. But as a general statement for CTCAE grade 2, treatment is the biggest indicator of a difference between a grade 1 and a grade 2. If treatment was indicated, if it's a uveitis event and they had eye drops prescribed, if they had any treatment, whether, systemic medication or any kind of, if it's a fracture, if they had a cast put on, that meets the criteria for grade 2. So keep in mind what the different nuances are of each of these. If it's an SAE and the patient was hospitalized, it's automatically a minimum grade 3 because of the hospitalization. And then obviously if it led to death, that's a grade 5. This asterisk down here about if medications were stopped or started, that inherently meets the criteria of non-invasive treatment. So that's automatically a grade 2. Could be higher depending on what else happened, but at a minimum, it should be a grade 2. Next slide. Just 2 more examples of paying attention to the criteria. These are 2 that we get very frequent questions about, and we also get frequently misreported. So the liver enzyme elevation is understandably confusing. We have 2 ESIs that are related to hepatic events. We've got the hepatic event ESI, and then we have liver enzyme elevation. The way our instructions are written, if you're reporting elevated liver enzymes, we want this reported as the hepatitis ESI, and it's grade 2 or higher using the liver enzyme levels shown there. And same with leukopenia, we just talked about this, but we don't want grade 1 leukopenia, just grade 2 or higher. So again, that quick reference card hopefully is going to be a saving grace. So as you're going through to decide if an event is reportable, and then if it is, how you need to enter data for that event. Next slide. And as far as rave goes, there's nothing special about entering data for the SAEs or ESIs and rave. All the rave rules apply as far as querying. But do remember that anything you enter in a query response does not become part of our data set. It's there for audit trail, which is important for auditing purposes, and we can see, why something is or is not changed, which is incredibly important. But if we're asking you to add information to a field, it's because it needs to be data that become part of our data set that can be used in analyses. So it's important that data are not entered in the query responses, just communication back and forth between you and whoever at DCRI is reviewing that form. This is especially important for the narrative. So the narrative, we especially for SAEs, our safety team here does a great job of asking for very specific pieces of information to be put in the narrative. Make sure you're putting it in the narrative itself and just not in the query response. And then obviously we have the supplemental SAE ESI forms for concomitant medications, immunomodulatory meds, and labs. Next slide. COVID-19. So we added COVID as an ESI last year. And since then we've had, I believe we're at 188 COVID events that have been reported as of earlier this week. So a couple things to keep in mind with this. We only want COVID events reported if you have documentation of a positive test. This can be a rapid PCR test. We're accepting antibody tests, which I realize fundamentally those are different, but we are accepting both of those as, positive test criteria. And again, if they have a positive test, but the patient was asymptomatic, that is still reportable. If the patient was asymptomatic, thought they might have COVID, but there's no test, we don't want those reported. And we've had a lot of cases where a site will tell us that you had a phone call with a family who said, maybe mom or dad had COVID, the child had symptoms or potential symptoms, but never got tested. We really don't want those reported. We really just want cases where the patient themselves, the registry participant themselves, had documentation of a positive test. And in most cases, at least based on the ESIs that have been reported so far, most of our COVID ESIs are non-serious. I believe we have between 5 or 10, probably closer to 5, that actually met SAE criteria because the patient was hospitalized. But keep that in mind as you're going through to enter your COVID ESIs, that if just the COVID diagnosis itself does not, that cannot be the only reason it's an SAE, because it's an important medical event. The registry said it's an ESI, it's important. So as long as it meets reporting criteria, we accept, grade 1 or grade 2 COVID.
And we have a couple of questions. Do you mean antigen and not antibody on there? And then the second question is, do we report if they say that if they say they were tested positive, but there's no documentation of their test?
Yeah, if they say they tested positive, but you don't have documentation, we're not asking, we don't want those reported. We really want you to be able to have documentation of that test. And because we ask you to put the test results in the SAE labs form. So we don't really want self-reported COVID at this point. Antigen versus antibody, I'm gonna have to pitch that to one of my MD friends who are on the line. Did I misspeak on that for antigen versus antibody test for COVID?
Both are acceptable. Is that what you were going to say? Hopefully.
I was going to say, well, I was probably had half an ear on it, but yes, either one could work. Great.
Any other questions? All right, next slide. Okay, we have 3 poll questions. So Nick is going to pop up polls. So I'm just curious how folks do with these. So our first poll question is this reportable? New onset uveitis. So a patient whose first diagnosis of uveitis was after they consented for the registry.
Looks like we have a good portion of people in, so share the results.
Good. That was hopefully a gimme question. Yes, new onset uveitis is reportable. The caveat is it has to be first diagnosed after consent. If they were diagnosed prior to consent, it's not reportable as an SAE, but we absolutely want it captured on the ESI or on the uveitis CRFs for each visit for GIA. Excellent. Second question, we have a patient who went to the ER for a skull fracture. They were admitted to the hospital for observation, but they had no treatment required for that fracture.
Looks like we again have the majority of people in, so.
Good. So this one was unintentionally confusing, and we didn't actually talk about this earlier. So good job for those of you who got it right. So technically we did add fracture as an ESI. So any reported fracture, doesn't matter what bone was fractured, is reportable, whether it's an SAE or not. The point of this question originally, I guess hindsight, it was not worded totally well, but we do, regardless of the fracture ESI, this would be reportable as an SAE because they were admitted to the hospital. But because we added fracture as an ESI, regardless of the hospitalization, this would be reportable. And lastly, just to hit this point home even harder, self-reported COVID without documentation of a positive test. Is that reportable?
a lot of quick responses here, so I'll end polling.
Hurts. All right, 7% of you who don't listen to me, that's fine. But no, we really want to have only COVID cases with documentation of a test. So as always, because we really do want to make sure that no one is unnecessarily spending time entering data. If you're not sure if it's reportable, reach out and ask us, and we'll help figure it out. Because we definitely don't want you spending time entering an event that's not reportable. Okay. All right, next slide. Just a couple other things regarding events, pregnancies. Just as a general reminder, I think folks are doing a fairly good job of entering pregnancies. We're only capturing pregnancies that occur from the time of consent forward, and we're only capturing pregnancies in female registry participants. And for those of you who've reported a pregnancy so far, you will note that we also ask you to complete a supplemental paper pregnancy form that DCRI Safety maintains. Ideally, that form should be completed when you first become aware of the pregnancy, and then every trimester until the end of the pregnancy. And then that form will give you very specific instructions about how to report any pregnancy complications as an SAE or not, depending on what happened. A lot of these are situation specific. So again, reach out to us with questions. Next slide. So event verification, Alan alluded to this earlier, because I know this is clogging up a lot of folks' DQR reports that you get every couple of weeks from us. Every event that's reported, whether it's an SAE or a non-serious ESI, gets reviewed here at DCRI. Our safety team reviews the SAEs, our site team reviews the ESIs. After that review is complete, it undergoes a supplemental review with CARRA to make sure that all events meet reporting criteria and are clinically have all of the information that we want documented in RAVE. While all of that happens, your SAE or ESI CRFs in RAVE are going to remain with the green, either the green circle or a query, depending on what's there. So those forms will not show as complete until that entire review process is done. All of our information has been captured, and at that point, we'll sign off from the event, and you'll get paid for the event at that point. So a lot of what causes some delays here is that we have quite a bit of back and forth on some of these events. Some of them do require some additional documentation. So depending on what the event is, if it was a malignancy, if it's a rare event, we will ask for some additional documentation just to absolutely verify that it was what was described in RAVE. So that can take a little time to do. But we typically have a cycle and a goal that we get as many, we try to keep these updated on a monthly basis. And worst case scenario, we try to, I think with a lot of you, get everything updated before a data harvest. So as many SAEs and ESIs can be included in a harvest as possible. If this is a case where if you've got concerns that an event has been incomplete for a long time, you can reach out and we'll see what's pending on it, especially if there's not an open query. And if it's just seemingly waiting to be signed off, we can let you know where it is and what's going on with it. And then I do want to do a quick plug for our long-term follow-up program. Long-term follow-up collects events as well. These are all self-reported from the participants or the family, depending on the age of the participant. We do verify most of the events that are reported via long-term follow-up. To do that successfully, though, we have to have a signed medical release form. So we talked about this on a couple of our last DCRI site calls, but it really is important that while you have participants still with you at your site, you get those medical release forms signed. Ideally, when you consent the patient, you'll get the release signed, but at any point while you have a participant at your site, you can get the medical release form signed and uploaded into RAVE. That drastically cuts down on some of the back and forth that we have to do with families for participants who are already in long-term follow-up to get that form signed, because we can't request any records without that form. So it is important to get that done. And since you all have relationships with the families, it's generally quicker and easier for you to get it done while they're at your site. Next slide. All right, that's it. Any questions before we move on? about either critical variables or events? No? Great. Oh, I think this is still me. I'm sorry. We can go ahead to the next slide. To give everyone a quick update, we've talked in really broad terms about some changes that are coming with how we are collecting PROs from our families while they're at your site, and our mechanisms for obtaining electronic consent. So we are actively working to get a REDCap Cloud platform built and in place that will facilitate all of this. It's going to allow for remote e-consenting for all of our sites, and it's going to allow for remote PRO collection for both in-clinic visits and telehealth visits. So the big picture idea is that you're going to be able to remotely obtain full Part 11 compliant electronic consent from your families outside of the clinic setting. And you'll also be able to send them a link to complete the PROs outside of clinic. So if you have a visit, our window is still going to apply, where it's the plus or minus 48-hour window, but you'll be able to send the link to the families to complete the survey on their own if you don't have time to capture them in the clinic. You will be able to still capture them in the clinic, either, hopefully we're getting away from paper, but either on paper or directly into REDCap Cloud. But if it's easier for everyone's time to do it outside of the visit, you'll be able to send the link and they can do it directly into REDCap Cloud themselves. You at the site will not have to do any data entry at all at that point. We're trying to design it in such a way that also allows for the REDCap Cloud system to integrate with our RAVE system, so that, as most of you know, the patient parent global right now is capturing Qualtrics, and then you have to go and manually enter it into RAVE. We are trying to bypass that manual step so that REDCap Cloud can send it directly to RAVE. So the goal is that this is going to decrease the time that you guys have to spend collecting and entering PROs. And then the other goal of REDCap Cloud is to provide an online survey option for long-term follow-up. So right now we're trying to collect all of our long-term follow-up surveys over the phone. We've talked at length about this, but phone is not ideal for this population. So we're hoping to give them the option of doing their surveys online, as opposed to sitting on the phone with an interviewer. So all of this is in the works, and we still have a lofty goal of getting this out to everyone midsummer. We're targeting July, and so I'm hoping that we're going to at least get phase 1 of this out in July, and then if there's phase 2 plus, we'll deal with that after. But the goal is that we can start working with you all to get this live and working in July. There will be some regulatory steps with this. We do not have to make a change to the consent form, but we will have to add REDCap Cloud as a data collection platform for the registry. So we will give you information to submit to your IRBs about this. The sites that rely on Duke will do that for you. Next slide. Speaking of the sites that rely on Duke, we are actively working to transition all of you away from Duke into WCG for your commercial IRB for the CARRA registry. So this is, we're working to get all the preliminary steps in place here. So all 22 sites that currently rely on Duke, you'll be getting information from us in the coming probably couple of weeks about steps to move away from Duke into WCG. This is, this can only make things better. I think any of you that rely on Duke know the struggles that we've had as far as timing and how long things take. Any of you who've used WCG before or were, you're going to be able to do a lot of this yourself, interact with their portal. If you have to submit personnel changes, PI changes, you can do all of that yourself. But we will still be able to submit some of the higher level amendments for you, so you're not going to have to do that. So all of the existing 22 sites should be hearing from Nina shortly about next steps. We do have 8 additional slots for any of our local IRB sites who would like to transition to WCG. So Nina's also going to be reaching out about to ask who of our local sites are both able, because I know some of you can't transition IRBs midstream, but if you're able to transition IRBs and you want to transition to a commercial IRB for the registry, we do have 8 slots. So we do want to open up that opportunity for local sites. Any questions? All right, then I will pass it on to, I believe, Mary Ellen or Chelsey. Chelsey, sorry.
You're good. That's fine. All right. All right, so I'm going to talk about CLUE, which is coming very soon. You should be receiving an email hopefully within the next week or two to begin enrollment. The goal is that hopefully the information and samples collected will lead to better treatments and improve quality of life for our patients with lupus. And as Alan mentioned early on, at the bottom of your data quality reports, there's that tab for cohort eligible patients. This is where you'll find your list of patients who are eligible for CLUE. Next slide. So this is the inclusion criteria and procedures for the study. So all SLE patients enrolled to CARRA Registry and have not had biospecimens collected. And so to enroll them in CLUE, you need to consent them for the biospecimen. We'll collect an EDTA and Tempest tube. No processing, so you just collect the tubes, label them, and ship them. Super easy. And then complete the CARRA Registry, CRFs, and RAVE, including the biosample form. We already collect samples for SLE patients. This is a little different because these can be patients that have been in the registry for long periods of time. They don't have to be brand new or a flare or anything. Next slide. Super quick. Does anybody have any questions? Next slide. I don't know who's doing the.
Me.
All right, Marilyn.
Hi. The next cohort to launch is the systemic JIA lung disease, and this study is collecting data and biospecimens. Grant Schulert at Cincinnati is the site PI. Next slide. So here's a look at the quick reference eligibility criteria. This will be available on the wiki. Eligible patients are systemic JIA patients with signs of lung disease. So they may be current registry participants or newly enrolled. Next slide, please. So data and biosamples are collected at 2 time points. You'll enter the usual registry data in RAVE, and there'll be supplemental data entered into REDCap Cloud. So the baseline visit would be if systemic JIA patients are not enrolled in the registry. If they're new, you would consent for the registry and biosample collection, complete the usual visit data in RAVE, and then the supplemental forms in REDCap. For systemic JIA patients that are currently in the registry and a new lung disease has been identified, they are eligible. Please consent them for biosample collection and complete the visit data in RAVE. And this may be an unscheduled visit, depending on the timing. And supplemental forms will be completed in REDCap Cloud. The second visit occurs in 6 months' time. Again, data is entered into RAVE and REDCap Cloud, and the second biosample is collected. So biosample, just to note that biosample collection is for SPIN sites only. So we're going to use the same CARRA biosample kit, and that completes participation in this cohort. So there are 2 time points and 2 biosample collections. Next slide. So site training or site initiation calls with the study team are going to start this month. Some calls have already been scheduled. Training on the REDCap Cloud site is required for account access. So you will receive email notifications from Boston Children's I just want to let you know the RedCap Cloud training link is time sensitive, so don't let it sit forever in your inbox without so please register, like log in and establish your account, even if you can't complete the training at that time. And additional information about eligibility and RedCap Cloud training will be available on during the site calls. And we just wanted to remind you, can I go to the next slide? This is the updated biospecimen cohorts for CARRA. So these studies are active. We've now added systemic JIA lung disease cohort and also the CLU cohort. So this will also be posted on the wiki and available. Any questions? No, that was kind of quick.
Nothing in the chat.
Okay, perfect. Well, we can go to, I guess, wrap up. If nobody has any questions, you can unmute as well if you want to ask. So we've had a surprise bonus lottery. Nick, who do we have? Drum roll.
Yeah, so it looks like we have Rudy Lynette. Not sure if that's the correct pronunciation there, and Priscilla Vasquez.
Okay, congratulations.
Awesome.
You will be, I will be emailing you when Alan sends me your email, or Alan, sorry, Nick sends me the information. Okay, so I see a question in the chat, I think, Anne.
Yes.
There's,
So this is a great question. Our programmers right now are checking our SAE calculations. There seems to be an issue with how the program uses the units, where it's not calculating correctly. So we're working on this. That's all I have for now, but thank you for bringing it up. We are checking to make sure that that's calculating correctly. If there needs to be a correction, it will apply to all of our existing data. And so everything will be accurate after we confirm it. Yeah, and I think it's all three of the lab values on the SLEDI. So anything that on the lab form there's a unit selection, we're checking to make sure that the math is appropriately converting units.
okay, and if anyone has any questions that they think of later, just please reach out to Anne or Alan or Chelsey or me, and we'll be happy to follow up. Just a reminder, the next DCRI call is on Wednesday, May 12th at 12:30 Eastern Time. And we will also be sending out an RCN doodle poll for our next call. If anyone has any topic requests, they can reach out to me or Chelsey. And if you are a local IRB interested in transitioning to WERB, just send an email to the DCRI mailbox there. Or if you would like additional training or have questions about the site reports, please reach out to DCRI at the email on your screen. Anyone? That's all I have.
Yep.
Chelsey, you're good? Anyone else? Anne?
Good.
Alan? Nick? Thanks. Oh, CARRA, thank you. Nick, Karen, Leslie, thank you so much for your support, because I know we needed a lot.
Thanks for you guys for putting this on.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for everybody for attending too.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.